Today we're returning to the British Museum for part two of our first three-parter museum tour, because the British Museum's immense size, you cannot do it quickly. So we've just finished the Egyptian rooms on the first floor, and this is the Arabian Peninsula. Not really a place that you see a lot of archaeological remains from in most places, but they have pre-dynastic temples, gods, figurines, vases, tools, ancient Egyptian writing there as an explanation. I love these vases. Underneath the step pyramid of Djoser, there's a series of tunnels that until recently were closed. They were closed when I was there. And there's a labyrinth of tunnels and side rooms full of these vases, which is quite hard to explain how they carved such a hard stone so perfectly. I love this wonderful piece. It's the Narmer palette. The original was actually in Egypt, I think in the National Museum. It was discovered in 1894 at Heracleopolis. It's telling the stories of the victories of Narmer. On each side it's surmounted by Hathor heads, flanking a serek containing the royal name. Really beautiful piece. So some wonderful examples here of vases and arts. Wine for the king. If you want to keep your wine fresh, you need to have a good vase. Here a lot of ancient Egyptian material. Really beautiful examples, very good quality. Really, here we're going through early Egypt. There's some burials before the dynastic periods. Before the pyramids there were mastabas. Before the mastaba is it's an Arabic word for a hut, and effectively you had a squared tomb like a hut, or bench. It's a bench in Arabic. And then you had stepped mastabas, which seem to have evolved into the step pyramid, which evolved into the pyramids. But they have beautiful example of pre-dynastic pit burials. And there's a jar burial here as well somewhere, if we can find it. But actually, best jar burial I've seen is if you watch our video on the Petrie Museum. It's a very complete example. And this is before mummification. Bodies were effectively left to be mummified by the desert. You have to remember how dry it is in Egypt. If you go to Temple of Karnak, there's a huge mud ramp. And it's not something left behind from the excavation. It was the ramp that was built to build the pylon wall. And when they built the pylon wall and inscribed the one side, they took the ramp down. But before they took the next ramp down, the pharaoh died, and the next pharaoh wanted to get on with doing something in his own name. So no one ever took the ramp down, and it's still there about 4,000 years later. And there's an early pit burial. Very good explanations of the different eras of pre-dynastic Egypt. Then we're going to head on past. You can see even in the early eras of Egypt, beautiful detail in the painting. Even rock art here, they've got some lovely examples of boulders which have been carved and inscribed, and there's an explanation of how they moved them. But really quite something. If you've ever tried to chip a hard stone, the stones the Egyptians worked with were very hard. So incredibly hard to break, and incredibly hard to break without shattering the stone, but they managed to inscribe delicate lettering and hieroglyphics on them. But lovely room. We'll probably move on. There's so much more to see in this museum. I do like the paintings on the walls. I remember coming here as not even a teenager before that. And these rooms haven't changed much, but they are pretty perfect. Some lovely examples of old writing. Here we're into ancient South Arabia, because the museum does cover the whole of Arabia and the Levant as well. This is pre-Islamic, a lot of this is Iron Age, later cultures when they clashed with the Egyptians. And there's examples of gods, goddesses, everyday life items, inscriptions. Some beautiful vases over there. And you can see a culture which is often forgotten about, but is well documented at the British Museum. Probably the only collection of ancient Arabian art and history I've seen. And although it's quite a small room, it's a very interesting one. It's room 53. And moving on to room 55, Mesopotamia. It's this room covers 1500 to 539 BC, and then the next room covers 6000 to 1500 BC, and after that, room 57, 8 and 9 cover the ancient Levant. But some beautiful examples of writing, some examples of they were the first people to preserve knowledge through writing. And here you have the Ashurbanipal Library Project. So they're trying to read all the different scrolls and clay tablets. There's examples here of some carving. A helmet here from the Assyrian Empire, which you can see the real one there, and in the background you can see the head with it carved. And some more examples of Assyrian. Hopefully you saw last week's tour of the ground floor where we covered Assyria in quite a bit of detail. And there's just so much here. It's hard to know which bit to pick on to talk about because I can't show you the whole museum. You'd fall asleep, I'd run out of battery, and the museum probably wouldn't be very happy. But here, beautiful example of this jewellery which was recovered, and it was worn by, I believe, the archaeologist's wife for photos to bring life to it. Here, beautiful lions from Assyria. In Babylon, the walls were tiled with painted tiles forming lions. And that's very much, if you see the Babylon that was recreated by Saddam Hussein, he covered it in a rather tacky version of the Assyrian lions. Now heading down to the staircase, just as the last staircase had mosaics from ancient Greece and Rome, here we've got carvings and inscriptions from the Assyrians. And heading into the Levant, some ancient coins. There's the game of some beautiful pieces here. The dig at was actually partly run by Agatha Christie's husband, so she was present for a lot of these finds, and it inspired her in a couple of her mysteries. Basically, they went to the royal cemetery of and there was a large ziggurat, there was temple and tombs, and there were large-scale excavations where we have a lot of interesting everyday items, and these two masterpieces, really wonderful, the Golden Fleece, and the level of detailing you see on these. This box is known as the Standard of It's decorated on four sides with inlaid mosaic scenes from shells, limestone and lapis lazuli, actually set in bitumen. And it shows a Sumerian army with its wagons and infantry chargers against the enemy, and prisoners brought before a larger individual, presumably a king. It's striking in its detail and its beauty, considering its age. It's about 4,500 years old. Here's some seals and rolls, and you can see how they were used to. There would be a carved cylinder, and you would roll it along wet clay and form a record of your seal or a message. Excellent explanation here of how cuneiform formed from pictographs, because cuneiform is effectively an alphabetization of a pictographic way of communicating. So you can think of it as the first writing, because it's the first time that there's an alphabet. Really wonderful pieces from different temples. You can see again the importance of bulls, the same way with the Egyptians. And the lion heads, always with the lions, the Mesopotamians and the Syrians. But some beautiful pieces, and one of the best collections in the world of Mesopotamian and Assyrian here. One of the things that makes the British Museum so exhausting is that it covers so many civilizations, and with each civilization it tries to give a feeling of their culture, their writing, their dress, their everyday life, ordinary items, gods, figurines, decorative items. Really, it's a capsule recording human civilization. And the Levant, excellent section there. I think it's fair to say, if you look at the British Museum, when you see a lot of material, it's firstly the fact that they could get hold of that material because they were undertaking archaeological digs there, and they were, as archaeology was born, they were rediscovering places in a way that hadn't happened before. But also the choice of collections at the British Museum often tells you the story of what its founders or its early curators valued, which was, in Victorian and Georgian England, they valued the civilizations on which the world was built, and the Levant makes it onto that page because it really is a spectacular, small but spectacular collection. In here's jar burials in a cave, really strikingly recreated. And a large collection of pottery. You can see the crossover between cultures, like a pharaonic figure there. Look at the harp there, and the golden helmet. Beautiful jewellery. You always have to pinch yourself and remember that these items aren't, cheap jewellery from the 1900s. These are beautiful jewellery that's 2,000 years old. Indeed, this headdress here, you can see the recreation on the right, and that's the original, still sort of squashed down, a picture of the X-ray. This is from the death pit at Ur. It's not exactly certain what happened there, but the grave was called the Great Death Pit because there were so many bodies in there. Little real evidence of the tomb itself, but it was mostly women laid together, and 4 of them were grouped around, musical instruments, including the silver lyre that we can see there. And all the women had elaborate headdresses. So quite what happened there is really lost to time, but it's left us with these beautiful lyre, and has recreated one over there, and the headdress you can see, all from a large group burial. You see there another ancient instrument, what remains. Really paints a picture of a civilization that liked the finer things in life, but quite what they were we can't tell. Out of ancient Mesopotamia, heading into the ancient Levant. Really wonderful selections. Iranian revival. Figure there looks a lot like the ancient pygmy god in Egypt, Bas. You see the lions. There's definitely maybe not a veneration of lions, but an admiration of lions, maybe for their brutal strength and power, which the imagery we're left from this era does leave a bit of an impression of a rather martial and military dictatorship, which enjoyed its fine music and dancing girls, but at the same time probably respected the lion's brutal power. There are plenty of hints of conquest along with hints of finery. When you see these beautiful silver plates, all from the Persian Empire, the King of Kings. A lot quieter than the ancient Egypt section, but there's a lot of interesting items. I'd say if you are limited on time after you've seen the Egyptian, you should see the rooms on Ur and Nimrud at the very least, because they are beautiful pieces, particularly the standard, the headdress and the lyres. And probably my favourite from them is the lamb, the sheep, the golden fleece. You can see all these people queuing up to make offerings. I believe that's the different peoples of the empire, because the Persian Empire covered a very large area with a lot of ethnicities. Each ethnicity and region would send its representatives to pay homage to the emperor, and that wall installation shows you one of those instances, and it's very striking in person, much more than the camera really captures. Now, Sasanian Empire. And we're in this area, we're in farming, so sort of early agriculture, and there's coverage of Britain's first farmers, some of the kind of just post hunter-gatherer, when we were using the same tools as we had for hunter-gathering, but we were starting to move into better pottery and becoming more developed and having grinding stones and starting to settle down a little bit. And there's some very good examples there. It's a little humbling to look at the first hints of civilization in Britain, and to think that at the time that we had that grinding stone in the Middle East, they had great empires with carved stone walls and the foundations of civilization and writing. You can see why the people who laid out the British Museum were so impressed with a culture they saw as far in advance of British culture at the time. Now we're moving on to Western Europe, And some beautiful examples. The torques here around my neck, they were a symbol of power and prestige, almost like a crown today. They weren't just worn by anyone, certainly not an elaborate torque there. Some really beautiful examples here, and I love this helmet. Almost like the iconic helmet with horns of the Vikings, which actually the Vikings didn't tend to have horns on their helmets. It was a Hollywood movie that added them. Beautiful shield here. Swords, pieces of swords, the scabbard and the guard. Great examples of ironwork, pottery, glass. Very delicate glassware for the time. Here a log guard from a fire. You know, you've got a fire, you need something to hold the logs, and you've got the prongs on the top to put the rods on to hang the meat and turn it. And at the front you need something, a fire guard effectively, and that's a very old one. Just moving from room 50 to 49, we're into Roman Britain, and you can see there pieces of uniform and weaponry from a Roman soldier, a legionary. If you're interested in Romanic items, then I'd recommend the museum tour and the Unbound History, the Caerwent and Caerleon. We did them both in a weekend a few weeks ago. Here's a layout of a Roman fort. More pieces of original wear like the cheek guard, gladius, bow, spear. Here's some gladiator clothing. So there's a mask, some armour, helmets, examples of what was worn and what remains, because obviously like those shield bosses, there would have been a large shield to go with it. Here, beautiful mosaic, really wonderful, from Fishbourne. There's quite a few examples from Fishbourne here. And this exquisite silver tray, really finely detailed, along with the everyday items of from axes and tools to items for the house, windows, glass, tableware. Beautiful mosaics. Got to have mosaics if you've got the Romans. Even roof tiles, sewer pipes, jewellery. Some very good examples of jewellery. I like the way the British Museum, when they show ancient jewellery, and we're talking, you know, 2,000 to 5,000 years ago, they often have it with a recreation so that you can see what it really looked like. But this is original. Really, I'd be happy if my silverware from the 1960s looked as good as that. It's absolutely pristine, along with some lovely glassware. Has a very green hue to it because glass was made in a different way back then. And I won't go into it on this video, but it means that it's not as clear as the glass of today. More silverware on the other side of the cabinet. A wonderful fragment of mosaic. There's a villa with excellent mosaics in Lineford, but I've been trying to get in it for a couple of years, but English Heritage have had it closed. Here's some beautiful silverware and metalware, heading more into post-Roman world. You can see here coins and metalware and pots. Some beautiful examples from the late Roman and post-Roman world. And then heading through into this room, this is one of the real treasures of the British Museum, just in a second. Byzantium. It's a very small collection on Byzantium. Um, if you want to see Byzantium work other than Turkey or Italy, they have excellent collections. But I'd say this single room here, and I'm not meaning the bit over to the right there, is certainly small by the standards of the British Museum. Here, beautiful vase made of carved stone, really wonderful. Just the level of craftsmanship involved. And here, one of the great treasures of the British Museum is the Sutton Hoo find. And Sutton Hoo, there was 2 burial mounds. The landowner gave permission to dig it, and he wasn't an amateur archaeologist. Basically, he didn't have a degree, so he was a digger for the museums, but he wasn't allowed to be running a dig. And if you watch the film on Netflix, The Dig gives a very good story of it. But he identified that it wasn't 2 mounds. It was a single mound that had been badly dug in the middle before, probably try and steal things. What it actually found was a longboat buried under the mound with a man in full armour. A just wonderful collection there, and the Sutton Hoo helmet. Just going down this side corridor, a few beautiful Indian pieces. And quite a small but very good collection of Asian art over at this side. You can see we've done the length of the building again. We're back down to the ground floor. Some wonderful old statues. Again, you can see the level of detail in the carving, and they're not naive like most European art in what we'd call the Dark Ages. Were rather simplistic. But actually, when you come here, this is the mausoleum of Halicarnassus. Once regarded as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. It actually, mausoleum, the word, comes from that temple. It was the burial of the king Mausolos of Caria. It's in southwest Turkey, and it's very impressive, and there's a lot of pieces from reliefs around the edge and the statues that stood on top. And there's a good explanation of which bits you're looking at, but very striking from an empire, a kingdom which is pretty much lost from time. You'd struggle to find many people outside of Turkey who've heard of the king of Caria, yet his tomb lives on through the ages. Definitely a room that's worth a visit. You can see there they would have stood on top of the pediment, along with the horse we saw a moment ago. Look at the detailing on those robes, the folds in the cloth. I'm no sculptor, but they're pretty impressive. I think the one thing that's missing is a model of what it looked like to show you the pieces that are still remaining. There's a drawing, but I think it's a complicated 3-dimensional structure, and then you're looking at small jigsaw pieces from it. Here, the heads of philosophers. We're heading through into the life in the Greek and Roman world. This is from Ptolemaic Egypt, and again you can see very Greek, although it's Egypt. If you took one of those vases, or even the heads and figurines and the gods, it would be quite easy to convince someone that you're looking at Greek works of art. Impressive dog here. If you love the ancient world and you're fascinated by Assyria, Egypt, Greece, Rome, maybe want to see things like the Levant and Arabia that you wouldn't really have seen, or the excellent collections on Asia or the ancient Britons, then a lot of people would say, well, spend a whole day. I'd actually recommend spending 2 half days. Even if you're here for a week, you can spend a morning, go and do something a bit more light-hearted, and maybe come back a second day, because the British Museum has so much material. Just to walk around and look at it, it's like the Louvre. It's, well, overwhelming. You'd be walking around here just staring at items and they blur. Whereas I think you need a bit of time to absorb it. And here this section is the Greek world, but it's the broader Greek world. So we're talking about the Greek world outside of Greece. There's an excellent selection of Cyprus and Greek islands and Greek settlements around the Mediterranean. Here, ancient Assyria, which I think we've really seen a lot of the royal palace of ancient Assyria. You can see it's closed off. Very beautiful. I love the lions, the winged human-headed lions. But we're going to head round to the most famous of Greek sections. So Pericles of Athens, instantly recognisable without reading the inscription. You can see exactly who it is. Beautiful carving. And some very good examples of Greek statues, vases. There's even a mirror there. I think actually those vases were made by burning, and the best explanation I've seen of that, how they were made, is actually at the Fitzwilliam Museum. If you watch our video on that, it has a very good collection of Greek pottery and a really good explanation of why it looks quite like it does, because obviously there's technique and the style, and sometimes the technique drives the style, and it's actually burnt, the pottery, and that's why you get that colour. Here there's an explanation of how they painted the pot and fired it. But I think definitely try out the Fitzwilliam in Cambridge, it's excellent. And there's a video on it, we go around the whole museum. Here you can see wonderful vases. Look at that huge amphora. Very delicate. It's hard to see with a camera just how detailed and delicate the painting on a lot of these is. It's real craftsmanship, and all of this we're talking 2,500 years or older. Surprising it even remains. Some very powerful statues, even headless. And shortly we're going to be seeing the Elgin marbles, the Parthenon Frieze, one of the highlights of the museum if you're interested even remotely in Greek history and art. Lovely sarcophagus here. Really beautifully carved, great detail. The list held open so you can see the detailing inside. Again, the athletes and animals and all the different patterns on the pottery. Very Greek in style, but you can see they're not all black with orange. Some very early coins. Here we're continuing into the Greek world, because It's important to think about the ancient Greek world as much more than just modern day Greece, because there were settlements the whole way around the Mediterranean where, well, civilization and culture went both ways. They adopted and transferred local knowledge, and they also spread Greek ways of life and belief. Here, a series of coins and trinkets, this huge chest, beautiful vase there. These are, I believe, from Mycenae. So from Mycenae. And you can see from the temple this painting of the beautiful wall art that was discovered there. These very striking figures. They're assumed to be gods, but they're a stylized human form. If you like this kind of thing, we're going to be visiting the Ashmolean soon. I definitely recommend. Ashmolean has the best collection I've ever seen of Grecian works from Mycenae and Knossos. Beautiful. If you just think, wow, they're a bunch of vases, move on to the next room. Here we have a large collection of fragments from the Parthenon. So these are small fragments from the Parthenon. There's a drawing there explaining it. So Parthenon was a temple to peace commemorating the end of the war, made in Athens at the Acropolis, and one of the most famous monuments of the Greek world. Now, there's a lot of controversy about the Parthenon Frieze, but basically Greece, it had ceased to be a Greek temple. It had been a Greek Orthodox church, then it was a Catholic church. So actually it was a church for longer than it was a Greek temple. It was the last surviving Greek temple with a complete roof in place. Because of the way they were built, it was quite easy for them to fall in over time. And it was still there. And then it was captured by the Turks. They turned it into a mosque and added a minaret to the dome that the Catholics had added. But unfortunately, when the Venetians were fighting the Turks, they seemed to have targeted it. Perhaps because it was a mosque, perhaps because it was symbolic. But what they probably didn't know was that the Turks had used it to store their gunpowder. So the temple really was blown to smithereens. And the reason you see all these pieces separated, they weren't cut down with a grinder. They had been blown out when the temple was destroyed. And Lord Elgin went there, paid some fee to the local ruler, and arranged to take away these unvalued items. Now, he certainly thought he'd done well for himself, and he took them back to Britain, but not for the British Museum. He seems to have had plans to put them on his grounds, but he had a very messy divorce and suddenly found himself short of funds. So he came up with a plan of selling it to the British Museum, and the British Museum purchased it and has had it on display ever since as one of the best examples in the world of one of the most significant Greek temples. Possibly the most significant. But the majority of the friezes are actually here and not in Athens, which is a bit of a sticking point with our Greek friends when they come to visit. You can see various reliefs of gods and satyrs. You can see from the front of a temple on a pediment the figures of winged victory there, various gods and goddesses. Very beautifully detailed, striking in the quality of the carving. And if you think this is about 450 BC, it's a beautiful low relief of the cavalry charging, man fighting a satyr, an army, showing just beautiful detail. Must have been a magnificent building when it was first built and it was polished white, because it is Pentelic marble, so it would have looked gorgeous in the sunshine. Really, it's not complete, it's not all of them, but it is a very large selection of the best details from. It's about 50% of the original architectural detailing was lost, and probably 40% made its way to the British Museum. Really beautiful. And a key symbol of the power of Athens. The British Museum loved it because it idealised that classical past. It's a huge room with dozens, and even though it's just fragments of the original, it gives you a feeling for the beauty and the majesty of it. And you can see where the low relief has actually gone too far and it's separated and parts have come off, because entire legs carved off the stone. Doesn't take much, for example gunpowder blowing up, for those limbs to be lost. Really gorgeous. And one of the iconic places to visit in the British Museum, you've not really been to the British Museum if you haven't been to the Elgin marbles, the Rosetta Stone, Sutton Hoo mask. And probably these days I'd say the Chinese section is growing in popularity. It's always crowded with Chinese visitors. And there is some beautiful material there. Personally, my favourite is probably the lions with the wings and the human heads from Assyria and Mesopotamia, that whole section. Here's some beautiful Greek god statues. This is actually a water wheel. It's a Roman water wheel, so 2,000 years old, but preserved enough that a fragment of it is on the wall. And here, great room, not one of the most famous, but you have a huge selection of figurines, lamps, pottery ornaments, decorations, glassware, vases, all beautifully displayed along here. And in the cabinets downstairs is an eclectic melange of different aspects of Greco-Roman life, from gladiators to hair decoration to every aspect of everyday life. Look at these lamps, really beautiful selection here. And we'll take just a little twirl around the ground floor here. You can see a fountain, almost looks like something from Victorian era. A beautiful column, various silverware, vases. A lot of these vases, it doesn't maybe show on the video with the glass, but when you look at them, a lot of them look almost like some replica from 10 years ago, not something that laid in the soil for 1500 years. Really exquisite pieces. Some of the best Greek vases I've ever seen in this room. And you can see also stoneware, mosaics, Really beautiful mosaics. In the centre, a series of cabinets, as I said. You've got things about dance and music, from a horn to a lyre to some flutes there. And Roman townhouse, pieces from around the house, even a seat there for the brazier for the fireplace. What you need in the kitchen, different utensils, gods for around the house, various shrine items and items of religious ritual. Reading and writing, so clay tablets, plates, styluses, ways of writing. Children, I love that there. It's like a children's seat from the Roman era. It actually looks surprisingly modern. And then boxing and wrestling, obviously famous in the Greco-Roman world. There's a reason they have Greco-Roman wrestling. It's a beautiful amphoras here in the centre. And armour, Greek armour, some of the best helmets I've seen. If you saw our video of the Fitzwilliam, they have an excellent collection. And a whole cabinet of material to do with gladiators. I believe that's a Hoplomachus helmet. That was the type of gladiator who was bare-chested and had a stabbing spear and a shield that had a nasty hook on the back. But excellent collection here of everything from everyday life in the Greco-Roman world. Even need a metal fist. Jewellery, decorative items. Really unique collection. It's very impressive and shows you the range of items that have survived from the Greco-Roman age. There's very few collections that are quite so thorough and detailed. And this room's probably not as busy as it should be. Now we're going to squeeze in one more room before we draw this to a halt, because we've got part 3, but there's still a lot of the British Museum to see. And this gallery is interesting. It's a gallery of money. So you have all sorts of different types of money from different eras, like currency, banknotes, kind of joke money, medals, traditions, ways of storing value. You can see there the Pacific Islands, the golden necklace, the beautiful coins here, different types of money, signs of authority. There's like a mobile bank account, the coins are stored on that, and goes through across the world and different time periods in a very large and well detailed but quite straightforward way of how money's been used to store money, store value, make value, how it began, how it's a symbol of authority, the way that it has been used over time and gained its importance. And like everything at the British Museum, it's impressive. It goes back to prehistory and covers a large range of cultures. You can see here religion and ritual in money. This room really covers all aspects of money in a single room, in every form that you could think of that, and ways in which merchants have accepted payments. Some interesting banknotes from countries that don't exist anymore and cultures that have lost this way of transferring value or just don't exist. and just its presence in modern culture through to spending, saving and borrowing, different types of storing money. But we're going to draw an end to it here. Next week we're moving on to, well, we're going to start with clocks, and I promise it's good. So please do like and subscribe, and hopefully we'll see you next week for part 3.